Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon. I want to start by apologizing for our late afternoon webinar. It's not the ideal time. I hope that all of you have coffee or tea or chocolate or whatever is going to kind of keep you energized for this 90 minutes. This is our introductory virtual meeting on amending compliance and improvement monitoring plans. So we're going to have a smaller group than maybe you're accustomed to because this is only the LEAs that are working on an amendment this year. Um, as a reminder, this training and what we're talking about today is funded by the California Department of Education. I'm Connie Silva, and I'm the director of the State Performance Plan Technical Assistance Project. Probably most of you are familiar with me and our team, but again, there might be some of you that are actually new to this, even though your district is not. So welcome, and we're gonna go ahead and get started. And we know that there's still more folks joining us. So just again, glad to have you here on time. So we like to start by asking you to post your name and your LEA or your SELPA, the organization that you're with, in chat. This helps us both to see who's here, and it also is one of our documentations for who comes. So just please make sure if you are actually signed in under somebody else's login that you also put in your name. Otherwise, we won't know that you're here. We'll think it's somebody else. And if you do happen to have more than yourself, part of your team with you, please go ahead and note that there's, a couple or more of you there together so that we get your names. Again, it's part of making sure that we're reporting accurately on who's here with us today. Okay, great to see all, again, some of the familiar names. We are recording this session. This is definitely one of the ones that we know there's a lot of information provided. You'll probably want it later to refer to, so we'll make sure that you get the recording after the session. And of course, if there are folks from your team that were not able to join us, you're welcome to share the recording with them as well at a later time. And then a reminder that we do keep this as accessible as we can. So there's closed captioning available to you. If you check down in your Zoom doc on the closed captioning icon, you can click on that to make sure that you have the captioning while you're viewing as well. I should say we also do have, no, we don't have a video today, so never mind about that. Okay, okay. So what do we have today? We're going to ask you to post your questions in chat as we go along. So please go ahead and use chat when you have a question. This is a meeting format, so if you really feel the need that it's going to be easier for you to speak up, you can unmute yourself, raise your hand, unmute yourself to ask your question or share your comment. We do have a couple quick Zoom polls that we're going to ask you to participate in. And then we do, somewhere in the middle of this, we have breakouts. So we're going to have you break out into small groups with your LEA. So you'll be with your team members if there's others of you here, and with your FMTA consultants. So just know that that is coming as well. Okay. All right. So I introduced myself. I want to share, you're also going to hear from Dr. Susan Stewart, our assistant director. And then just, again, you probably know our names, but those are the faces there of the rest of our SPP-TAP team. And then again, we have our FMTA consultants, many of them here with us today. We work very collaboratively with Unit 1 and Unit 4 of CDE. Those are the folks that, as you know, that monitor your CIM plans for when you're addressing significant disproportionality. We also have many of our TA facilitators, our SPP-TAP TA facilitators with us today. So again, especially when you're able to get into the breakouts, you'll be able to have more interaction with them, but just want to let you know who's in the room with us today. Okay. All right. And you probably saw them also signing in and they're in chat as well. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover today. We really are going to want to walk you through the steps in completing your amendment, right? So we want to make sure that you understand how to handle that amendment, and in particular, how the amendment supports the budget, right? You have a new 15% set aside to deal with. Also, how it affects your implementation of your current CIM plan, and your sustainability efforts for continuing your CIM and making sure that the progress that you're making, again, sustains even when your CIM is done. And then, of course, we want you to know where to find not only the required documents, but also some of the helpful tools for completion of that amendment, okay? And I see more popping into chat. Just want to make sure there aren't some immediate questions. Okay. So we wanted to show you, again, just the big picture of who is significantly disproportionate this year in California, who's been identified, and also the indicator that they're identified for. So I know this is a complicated table here, but it's I'll just walk you through it. So overall, we have 76 LEAs in California that were identified in 2025 as significantly disproportionate. 16 of those are brand new to the process, or at least had a gap year between identifications. 60 of them are continuing. And some of those continuing ones are doing a new CIM plans because their 3-year CIM is over. They're starting a new one. So they're doing the step-well submission with a new plan. 22 of those are doing amendments. So that's who's in the room with us today. Either you're doing an amendment, the first amendment to a current existing CIM plan, or your second amendment. So just wanted to show that. And then the chart that you see there is the indicator, lists the indicator that folks have been identified for, and then the most frequent, not necessarily the only, but the most frequent ethnicity tied to those identifications. So you can see that indicator 10, specific learning disability for our Latino students, continues to be one of our most common areas of identification. And then also African American, and also Latino and white for emotional disability and other health impairments. So those are, again, just the most common ones that you can see just from that table. And as a reminder, that 108 indicator at the bottom of that, that's because we do have LEAs that are out significantly disproportionate in more than one area, right? So that's why that doesn't add up to the 76. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead now and pass it on to Susan, and we're going to get more into the content of what we're discussing today.
Great. Thank you, Connie. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate what Connie said, is that we've got a couple of groups that are here today. You're all working on amendments. Some of you created your CIM plan in 2023, and last year you did an amendment. I think it was called an addendum at that time, and now you are ready to do your second amendment on that 2023 plan. And others have created your CIM plan in 2024. So you are at the point where you're going to begin amending it for the first time. And next year you will do the second amendment. The reason that you have the amendments is because there are annual requirements that are coming down from the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which includes the Policies, Practices, and Procedures Review. And also you have a new CCEIS budget for each of the years in which you are identified as significantly disproportionate. So the amendments are the way in which you complete those required activities and also adjust for the new budget. So what I'd like to do is ask for you to quickly take a poll, and we're trying to find out if you are developing your First Amendment or your Second Amendment. It's possible you don't know, so if that's true, just go ahead and mark that. But we do have, I'm realizing that yes means amendment number 1 and no means amendment number 2. We just didn't do too good of a job of getting our poll done. So amendment number 1 is yes, amendment number 2 is no, and I don't know is the third option. My apologies. Appreciate how everybody's adjusting on the fly. That's fantastic. Again, amendment number 1 is yes, amendment number 2 is no, and I don't know is the third one. Okay.
It looks like responses have slowed down, so I'm going to go ahead and share the results.
Great, thank you. All right, as you can see, most of you are doing your First Amendments. That means you wrote a plan last year, and a smaller portion of you, about 20%, are doing your Second Amendment, which means that you did a plan in 2023, and there's quite a few of you that don't know. So if you need some help discerning whether you are working on your First or your Second Amendment, you can contact your FMTA consultant, or you can contact us here at SPP-TAP. There's a couple of things that we want to remind you about before we start talking about the logistics, the details of the amendment. And the first is the annual determination letter notification. We want to be sure that you have read that and you know what your identification is for. A little bit later, I'll show you how you could find your risk ratios for the last 3 years that indicate that you are significantly disproportionate. And the other piece that's important for you to complete is the assurances form. That was due 30 days after receipt of the assurances form that CDE sent to you via email. I think we're just a little over that due date. So if you haven't done that, that's really important to do. There's requirements both from the federal mandates as well as what CDE requires of you. And there is a preliminary budget that needs to be completed in that assurances form before all the signatures are done. So be sure that you're making sure that has happened and that all of the pieces are complete. And as we're looking kind of at the big picture, your amendment will be due October 10th this fall. So October 10th, put that in your calendar. Of course, you can complete and send in your amendment before that date, but that is the date that it is due. I mentioned that I was going to tell you how you can find your data. And this year, California has created a dashboard that allows you to access that data. So we're on the caltan.info website. And at the top, you'll see that there's a monitoring tab. And beneath that, you want to select the LEA monitoring status. That will then have you scroll down to the place that's marked in red, which says, I don't know if you can read it, but significant disproportionality data file. As I mentioned, this is going to indicate the areas of disproportionality for particular student groups in the last 3 data years. And it gives you the risk ratios as well as the determination that you're significantly disproportionate based on that data set. If you have any questions about your data, please contact your consultant, your FMTA consultant at CDE. You can also contact Stephen Rogers, who works with the data, but I encourage you to start with your FMTA consultant first. I want to give you a little bit more information about this caltan.info website. So in the past, the majority of the materials that we provided to you were on the SPP-TAP.org website. CDE is trying to consolidate all of the work that's being done around the compliance and improvement monitoring system. And part of that process is to have a website where everyone who is dealing with compliance and improvement monitoring goes to gather their information. So at the top of the caltaninfo.website, let me say that again, caltan.info. It's so hard to say the .info because that's not a suffix I'm used to, but it's really important you get the right one, caltan.info, because otherwise you'll go somewhere else. When you're on that website, you are going to click on the monitoring tab. Beneath that, you're going to click on the compliance and improvement monitoring. The next place that you're going to click once you get to the bottom of the page is the significant disproportionality tab. If you don't click on that tab, you'll end up in the targeted information. And that's because that's what the default is. So be sure you're on the significant disproportionality page. Once you're there, you're going to be looking at step 4. Why is that? That's because you're in implementation. Steps 1, 2, and 3 are development of the plan. So the amendments make sense because they are under step 4. So that's where you're going to click. And that will bring you then to the activities for significant disproportionality page for step 4. And at the bottom, you see there's something that says start here. There are 2 documents, and I know it's very difficult to see. Some of this is quite tiny, but there are 2 documents that I want to be sure that you're aware of. The first is the amendment activity handout for significantly disproportionate LEAs. And this is another CIM across the board CIM structure that all of the LEAs that are completing CIM, whether it's for significant disproportionality or for some other kind of indicator, they will all have activity handouts for each of the activities within the steps. The item that's right beneath it is actually the template for the amendment. So you want to click on both of those. And let me just quickly show you the two activities, the two documents. The first is the activity handout, the amendment activity handout, and the second is the amendment form itself. It's really important that you're following the activity handout because that will help you keep on track so that you meet the requirements from both the feds and from CDE. And it also gives you structure so that you can amend your plan effectively. And I'm going to hand it over to Connie to start walking through the amendment form.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Yeah, so again, if you wanted to have those documents in front of you, you certainly could, but we're going to walk you through that amendment form. And the activity handout really is the instructions, right, on what to do. But we're going to walk you through. So what you see right here, these, there are actually 10 sections. So the amendment form has 10 different sections. Some of them are very brief, some of them are a little bit more detailed. But these are the things that need to be completed in order for you to submit your amendment. So we're going to walk through them one at a time. And the way that these slides are presented, we wanted to give you an actual visual of what it looks like on the amendment form, but then we've also put pulled out some of the text because, as Susan said, this is kind of tiny when you're looking at a document, right? So section 1 is just your information on your LEA, right? So it has like your name, your email, so on. But then there's a few different sections that are we want to point you to. And one is it asks you for the step well submission year of your CIM plan. So going back to when Susan asked you, when was your original CIM plan written, and then what amendment are you doing? You want to make sure you know whether or not your approved CIM plan was a 2023 or a 2024 plan, and you would enter that. And then the date of your amendment submission. So this would be 2025 for all of you. You'll be submitting a 2025 amendment, whether it's the first or the second, right? The last little box there that you're going to fill out is the reason for your amendment. So I'm going to go into that. CDE, the way that this form has been developed, there are 3 different reasons why you might be amending your CIM plan. So let me just go over those 3 reasons, and then we'll talk about which one you're using, right? So here, and then this is actually in the activity handout, because the activity handout is what gives you the information in order to complete this form, right? So here's the 3 reasons. The first one, the green column, is the GANs. So every LEA is, identified as significantly disproportionate. They're told to move that 15% aside, but you don't know what the exact 15% is until you have received your grant award notification, right? The GANs comes out. So as soon as you actually have your GAN, you amend your CIM plan so that you have a correct budget amount. So that's something all LEAs do, and it's pretty simple. There's only a few things you need to do in order to amend that. Then there's the possibility of ADL, which is the annual determination letter, right? This is the category that everybody is in today, right? So any LEA that's currently implementing a CIM plan and then has an additional identification of significant disproportionality needs to complete that amendment to determine, again, what activities they're going to be doing and how they're going to be spending their funds. So that's what we're talking about today. The other possibility for using this amendment form would be that an LEA can initiate an amendment at any time, right? So if something is going on, there's a new challenge, some new information that you want to make a change for. I mean, you would talk with your FMTA consultant, but then you would actually amend your approved CIM plan to reflect the changes that you're wanting to make, okay? So as I said, the ones that we're all talking about today, when that box that said, what's the reason? The reason is because of your ADL, right? So that's why you're submitting this amendment in October or by October 10th, right? Okay. Okay, so that's section 1. So let's go on to now section 2. Section 2 is all tied to policies, practice, and procedures review. Okay. And I know we're moving kind of quickly, so again, feel free to post questions. That first one's probably pretty easy, but as questions come up, feel free to post them in chat. So what this asks for is, again, the date of the policy, practice, and procedure review. What date has it been completed by your LEA? And then the second one are the methods and dates that you publicly shared, those changes, right? So those are 2 of the requirements, again, in IDA that have to happen annually. So one of the things you might be wondering is, well, we have reviewed this, we've revised it, We've looked at, what else are we talking about? What are we doing this year? Because we've done this before, perhaps we've done it, more than once, right? So let me explain a little bit again about what it is specifically that IDA requires, not just of you, but of the state, right? So what does CDE have to do? So here's what it says under IDEA. There's an annual policies, practice, and procedure review. So under IDEA, the state has to provide for the annual review. Again, this is what LEAs do, but the CDE is required to actually monitor this and document it, right? So, and if appropriate, based on that review, the revisions of the policies, practices, and procedures used in identification or placement in particular educational settings, right? I don't need to read this for you. I just want to really show that it is required that it happens annually, and I can explain a little bit in terms of how it would look different for an amendment year versus the year that you did your sort of root cause analysis and developed your CIM. But the second part of this requirement is that the LEA has to publicly report on revisions of policies, practice, and procedures, right? And again, it's not just a change in a board policy, it's a procedure at the district level that would also need to be publicly reported, right? So that's why those questions are on that form. And again, when you're identified as significantly disproportionate, the whole purpose behind that policy, practice, and procedure review and addressing those policies, practice, and procedures is because you're addressing those policies, practice, and procedures that are contributing to the significant disproportionality in your LEA, right? So again, disproportionality based on your race and different racial and ethnic groups of your students. So in order to get a little bit, more, I don't know, maybe concrete about, again, what it would look like for an amendment. If you remember, I'm going to just give an example. Let's just say that one of the policies that we needed to change was what happens with students that are absent from a classroom, right? Do they have the ability to make up lost class assignments? And you might not have policies around it. Maybe that's something you realized was a factor for your students that are chronically absent. And that's part of the reason why you think students are being inappropriately identified, is they're not given the opportunity to do some sort of catch up or to remediate what they have missed. So you change the policy. That could be something that's just something that you put in writing and reported upon in, last year. But now what are you doing about that? You're probably training staff on this new policy. You're probably creating practices and procedures around, when it's allowed, how is it allowed, how is it communicated to students and their families, and so on. So those would be things that now are part of your plan, right? It's part of your action plan for improvement. So when you're reporting on an amendment, it might not be talking about what you originally did was to create this policy. It might be talking about, well, now we have trained people, so now we have a handbook that is on our website, or now we have met with parents and let them know about the new policy, and that went out through, some kind of parent announcement, some kind of letter, right? So again, you're both talking about the changes that you've made, that could really be something that you're doing through your action plan, and then how you're publicly reporting those changes, okay? So it would not be a repeat of what you did last year. It would be, where are you right now? Kind of like Susan said, we're in implementation stage. So where are you right now? And what have you been doing that fit this requirement, and making sure that you're reporting that so that CDE has accurate records, okay? So I think as we go into the action plan, you'll get a little bit more information about how each activity relates to the others, but that's really what you're providing in that PPP table around section 2. So section 3 is talking about the areas of disproportionality. So I will say not everyone will fill out section 3, because the question specifically asks is, do you have a new area of significant disproportionality? So if I'm an LEA that has been identified for African American OHI, and this year or my amendment, I'm still identified for the same group, this would not be applicable to me. So it would just be an NA, right? But if my LEA was identified for African American OHI, and now this year, in addition to that area, or perhaps instead of that area, maybe we've dropped out of that area, our area now is different, African American under emotional disability, let's just say. It's a new indicator. And so this section 3 asks you to list that indicator, what's the new areas, and then it also asks you to, it asks what are the contributing factors, the data for this new area of significant disproportionality, and then the second box is how were the educational partners involved in the review and discussion of these data. And the reason for that is, as you know, what you've created in your CIM plan in, again, either a year ago or 2 years ago, was based on one particular group of students whose needs you were trying to address to eliminate the significant disproportionality. Well, now you've been identified potentially for the same group of students, but it's a new indicator. So you really do need to take a look at your data again and see if there's anything in your original root cause analysis that would now be different. Perhaps you weren't, particularly if you were identified for a new group of students, let's just say you were out now for Latino students, perhaps that's data that you didn't look at as closely because, again, that was not the group you were identified for. So while this is 2 small boxes, if you are actually identified for a new indicator, this is one of the sections that you're going to spend the most time on, right? If you're not identified for a new indicator, then again, it doesn't apply to you and you can skip section 3. But you'll want to fill out both of those boxes if you are identified in a new area. So I think we are going to ask, because again, it makes a big difference, do you have a new area of identification? Again, this is in a poll. And so you were identified for one area. Is there a new area this year that your previous CIM plan did not address, right? So it's just a yes, no, or I don't know. And going back to section 1, where it asks you your areas of identification, obviously you're going to list all of them, whether it's new or not, right?
Okay, about 40% of you have answered. I'm going to give you about another 15 seconds to add your answer if you haven't had a chance to do that. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And as you can see, Connie, the large majority of them do not have a new area of identification.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, so most of you will be able to skip over that. There were some that don't know. And again, that's really important that you connect with your FMTA consultant so you can know whether or not you do have a new area of identification and review your former plan, right? That will definitely give you the information. You can look at your data now and look at your former plan. What area were you identified for? That will give you the information as well. But okay. All right. And of course, always as you're looking at your data, you want to be looking at, are there areas that are creeping up, right? Sometimes when we're addressing one indicator, another one is on the rise, even though we're making some progress or lowering our risk ratios for another one. So this whole process of amendment does mean that you are looking at your data, right? Okay, so let's go on to section 4. Okay, let me see. I do see something. It was difficult from Jeff. It was difficult to make any change when plans were approved in November, December of 2024, and LEAs received their new letter February 2025. Yes, you're absolutely right, Jeff. So particularly if this is your first amendment, so you just put in your plan, and now you have, again, you're being asked for an amendment. In that case, quite honestly, your work for this amendment is going to be less than if you were doing your second year amendment. And the reason for that is, as you're saying, you just got something done and hopefully approved, which means there's not a whole lot of change that's going to happen between now and when you submit your amendment. When we get into this later parts of the amendment form where you're talking about the budget and what you're actually going to do in activities, I think we'll give you some specific examples. But in your case, more than likely, you're going to be extending what you're doing for a longer period rather than adding or changing something to your plan. But as we get into the more specifics, I think it might become a little bit more clear for you in terms of what you're doing versus what others are doing. Yeah, appreciate you bringing that up. Okay, so section 4 talks about the target population, and this is something that everyone needs to pay attention to and update, even if you're not identified for a new group of students, a new indicator, right? So again, I know the boxes are small. The first one asks the criteria for your target population. You might be keeping the exact same criteria. For instance, Jeff just said, we just got our plan approved. Chances are you're not doing some kind of additional root cause analysis that means you're going to change your criteria. So probably the criteria is the same, but for some of you, it may have changed, and we'll talk about some of the ways in which you might make a change, right? You still, of course, have to provide the estimated percentages by race and ethnicity. That is really absolutely necessary in order for CDE to determine whether or not you have an appropriate or sort of allowable target population. Talk about that a little bit too. And then you have to give your estimates of the number of students in your target population that are currently identified as needing special education, so those with an IEP, and those that are not identified as needing having an IEP, right? So those two groups of students have to be separated out. So that's part of the reason, because you're actually given numbers here that you want to make sure that you have clearly defined your target population, right? So I'm going to say a little bit more about that by reminding you about what, again, IDA requires. So the students who receive services, comprehensive coordinated early intervening services, right? They need to be children age 3 through grade 12, and particularly but not exclusively children that are in the group by race and ethnicity that you were identified for, right? So in other words, if you were identified for your Latino students in SLD, it's going to be predominantly Latino students that fall into your target population. That's part of the reason for that disaggregated by race and ethnicity percentages. CDE needs to be able to see what those are in order to, again, determine, does this look as though it's an appropriate target population? And then also they need to be, they're supposed to be children that are currently identified as, not currently identified as needing special education services, but who do need additional academic or behavioral supports to succeed in a general education environment. That's who's typically in that group. It can also include children with disabilities. At no point can it be only children with disabilities. And it is, again, because this is when we're talking about when the indicator is an over-identification, we're talking about preventing students from being identified. Therefore, the services are almost always for students that do not yet have IEPs or receiving special education services. If you're out for separate schools or for discipline, then you are more likely to have students with IEPs that are currently receiving services who would be a part of your target group, and perhaps larger numbers of those as well. Okay. So talking about our target population again, here's why, even though you just did a plan and your criteria may not have changed, right? You have already determined what types of students, what are the criteria for selecting those students. You still need to update this for your amendment because we're talking about a different year and different years of services. So for instance, I'm going to give you an example of an LEA. We have identified our target population as we're going to serve first graders who have chronic absenteeism and who are what do I want to say, in three particular schools, right? So let's just say that we've decided we are identified for our Latino students. So we have selected the schools with the highest percentage of Latino students in terms of enrollment, and then looked at those that have chronic absenteeism. Again, you would be saying what particular time frame you looked at. Perhaps you looked, for the kindergarten year and then made those determinations. And then they're going to be first graders, again, that meet those criteria. Okay. So now I have a new budget. Am I continuing with that budget to serve the same group of first graders? Or in other words, am I following them into second grade because the money's not available until next year? Next year, that group of students are going to be second graders, right? So with this new pot of money, is it now second graders that I'm serving? Or am I actually serving a new group of first graders, right? So this is why you have to be explicit in updating your target population definition, even though you're saying, we're not changing anything, we're doing the same thing. Yes, but you're going to be counting students. Remember that you have to track the students that you're serving, and you're going to be giving those numbers to CDE on an annual basis about which students are receiving services. If you didn't actually decide, are you still working with the same group of first graders that are now second graders and then third graders? Or am I working with a new group of first graders? You're not going to know how to give your numbers to CDE that are accurate, right? So again, Those are decisions that your LEA can make, but you just want to be explicit when you're updating that target population. And in that example I just gave you, they were working with 3 schools. If we decided, oh, we have a new pot of money, we're going to follow those same first graders, now they're second graders, but because we have this new pot of money, we want to work with one additional school, right? You would then, again, be updating that target population with your amendment to really label and describe to CDE, who am I serving with this new pot of money, okay? Even if there is not a change in those students, then you would be saying it's going to be the same group of students, but now they'll be in second grade, right?
Connie, there's a question in chat.
Yes, okay, let's see. The students with an IEP in a non-SIGDIS area and ethnicity should be fine. I'm not sure that I understand that, Julie. Students with an IEP in a non-SIGDIS area, are you talking about not of the same race or ethnicity? Yes, okay. So it's important that, I like this question because it's important, if you go back to what the law says, it's particularly but not exclusively. So again, in this district, I'm out for my Latino students SLD. When I select my target population, it needs to be particularly Latino students, but not exclusively. So some of those students in that target population are going to be of a different race or ethnicity. In other words, students that were not part of my identification. But the thing about an IEP is always with your criteria, the example that I just gave earlier, first graders with chronic absenteeism in these 3 schools. Some of those students may be students with IEPs, but probably the majority of them are not, right? So I could never select them just because they have an IEP. That would be an inappropriate criteria, right? But if some of them have an IEP and are in that first grade class with chronic absenteeism, they could be included again. They wouldn't be not included or excluded. Okay, thank you. So I want to I share with you some of the common errors that we see, particularly in amendments. Okay, so this is some of the things that we see is that we want to make sure that you include the demographics of the target population. A lot of times districts just say, well, you know, it's the same group, so I don't need to give those numbers. You really do, because again, demographics change, and so CDE still needs to see who's the group that you are serving with these funds, or that you're creating your systemic changes around with these funds. So the demographics may not have changed very much, but you want to make sure to include that, again, broken down by race and ethnicity. And then your rationale for selecting a particular school. So if you put it in there 2 years ago, that the reason we selected these 3 schools was because of, you know, again, it could be socioeconomic status, it could be something with what services are available in that school, it could be the percentage of students that were by race and ethnicity who are enrolled in that school. But whatever your reason is, you want to continue to provide that in your description when you're limiting it to a certain number of schools. And then what's not allowed, right? We do see districts that continue to say something like, all of our first grade students that need additional support. All students, it can never be all students. So yeah, if you do that, it automatically should be, you know, you'll be asked to change that. If you go back to the definition in the law, it talks about students that need additional supports in order to be successful. Every student in first grade does not need additional support in order to be successful, right? So it can't be all first graders, for an example, okay? And then the other thing is we cannot use race and ethnicity as a criteria. So we've had districts that have asked, well, what if I say it's not just African-American students, but it's also our Latino students? No, you can't do that. And the reason is once you put that as a criteria, you're excluding certain students, right? So you're excluding your white students, your Asian students, your American Indian students. You can't do that. So race should never be part of the criteria, even though you are making sure that you are end up with a target population that is particularly of a certain race or ethnicity. It is not a criteria, okay? And then you want to avoid that vague language. Again, you don't want to just say students who need additional supports. You want to define that so that if I'm trying to decide which students, again, I'm counting and tracking, and then I leave at a later point, and now Susan's responsible for this, if she didn't know my definition, she's going to be counting and serving different students than I was, right? So get as specific as you can in that definition. What's the criteria? And then the last thing is, as I said previously, clarify if you're serving the same group of students in the later grades or years, or if you're serving the incoming students and you're sticking with supports and services are always done in first grade, or supports and services are following certain groups of students, right? Okay. So again, those are just some of the common errors. I do want to point out, we have seen plans because CDE allows us to see the plan so that we can continue to provide hopefully better training around this stuff. So obviously I'm giving you these examples of errors. Sometimes plans do sneak through and they're approved, even though the target population wasn't really approvable. So it's part of the reason why when you do an amendment, you want to go back and look at your target population. If you notice that you did one of these things that we said as a common error, correct it. Right? You have an amendment, go ahead and change it, correct it. Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I don't know if there's more questions on the target population. That's an area that we often end up with just some confusion around. Feel free to post those in chat. And again, this is a nice area too when you're within the breakouts with your FMTA consultants that you might want to take the time to ask about that if you have something specific to your LEA. Okay, so I'm going to keep us moving. Section 5. So this is where you now write in, it's just one box. It's the rationale for any changes that you're going to make. So while it's one box, it does ask for data, right? So this is where before you fill in this box, you really want to have taken the time to take a look at your data. Things may not have changed, you know, particularly if you just had a plan that was approved or you really haven't started implementing. So it may not be that there's a whole lot to say in there. You know, so that is okay. But if this is your second amendment, you've been implementing your CIM plan for about a year, you should have some information probably from your progress reports, right? We're not saying that you need to do something completely new, but hopefully you've been tracking your progress and what's been changing. So you can put in data from what you're seeing now, what has changed in terms of your baseline data to what is happening right now. And what you're doing here is just providing just a narrative statement, you know, a paragraph or two about your data and any changes that you want to make to your measurable outcomes and activities, you know, looking at the action plan, because we're not there yet. You first want to provide just a narrative around, this is what we want to do with this additional money based on this data, right? If you're continuing things, that's perfectly okay. You would again put a rationale as to why you're continuing things, right? This doesn't necessarily mean that you are changing things. It's a rationale for what you're doing next with these funds. Okay. All right. So we have that pause button here right now because we know this has kind of been talking at you a lot. You might have questions. You might also just want to get up and stretch a little bit or refill your cup of tea. I'm going to end up passing it back to Susan. We're going to go over another section and then we're going to be in breakouts soon. So
Great. Thank
I
you.
don't see any new questions. Okay.
No, and I think you addressed Jeff's question about you know, the challenge of not having had the chance to do any of that implementation. So in the rationale piece, that's where you're going to make note of that, right? Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
Good.
All right. We're going to go on to section 6, and I know it's tiny, I apologize, but the middle portion of this sheet should look pretty familiar to you. It contains all of the elements of your plan form, and this is where you will be adjusting your measurable outcomes and activities, and again, including data from section 4. So don't forget to look at your implementation data if you have it to determine how you're going to make your adjustments to your measurable activities and measurable outcomes and activities, pardon me. Again, if you don't have baseline data yet for your measurable outcomes, this is the time to get that so that you can make a good determination of what kind of progress you are making. as you do the implementation. There's a section for that in right underneath the measurable outcome is a baseline data line. In addition, you want to be sure that you're updating the form. And so what we often see is, well, not often, but occasionally we see folks who copy and paste from their previous plan or their previous amendment, but they forget to go back and update the timelines, who is responsible to do it, their target population, and so on. So just be mindful of that and make sure that you are thinking about going forward, who is going to be doing what and what is our timeline for that. So just be attentive to that. There are two pieces of this section 6, that I want to highlight for you. And the first one is this fund sources and years of CCEIS funding. So you've always had the fund sources, like, are you using CCEIS funds? Are you using LCAP funds? Are you using general education funds or the general fund? What you're going to do this time is you now have a new budget. So you need to be really clear about which activities you're paying for out of which budget. So as you go through your activities, be mindful of that. If you're continuing an activity, you might end up having 2 different budget years, and we'll talk about that a little bit in just a minute. The other area that I want to highlight for you is it's called a continuation key. And I know you can't see it now, but I'm going to, on the next page, I'm going to blow it up for you. And that goes into the second column in that second table. And that is how you're going to be explaining to CD. It's kind of a shorthand for explaining to CDE exactly what you're thinking you're going to be doing in amending your plan. This is the continuation key. And I recommend that you go ahead and take a quick picture of this slide as I have it up, because you're going to want to refer to it during the breakout sessions in just a little bit. They're only 10 minutes long, but hopefully we'll have a chance for you to spend some time with your FMTA consultant to talk about your continuation of your plan through this amendment process. And remember that as you're thinking about your continuation of the plan, your goal is systems change. So keeping that in mind is really important. And as you can see, there are 4 different ways that you might amend your base plan. And the first 3 continuations focus on the same group of students over time. And then the fourth one is where there's a bigger change because you're adding something new, and that could potentially be new students or new activities rather than just shifting how you're doing things. So I'm going to walk through each of these one by one. And as I said, at the end, you'll have an opportunity to meet with your FMTA consultant in a breakout room to discuss how you're thinking about continuing or amending your CIM plan and how you envision continuing or amending your CIM plan in 2025. Okay, so the first one is the expanding. So when you expand your base plan or your CIM plan, you are expanding the students served, but you're not changing the criteria for the target population. You might be serving students in a new school or in a different grade than the students currently served with your current budget. Now, if your target population criteria does have schools and grades named, you'll need to modify your target population for this expansion. And expanding the services to new students is really predicated on having data that shows that the needs for the services are still evident. So either you want to note that the current services are effective in the current target population. Now, if you don't have implementation, haven't had a chance to implement, it may be reasonable to continue the services and just think about, well, we've got some additional funds that we didn't have in the past that we could expand these services to perhaps more schools. Here's an example. An LEA is really successful in providing social emotional learning for activities for pre-K through second grade. And they really want to provide those services in the 3 schools where they started the program this year, and they want to add 3 more schools. Again, they're still working with pre-K to second graders, and there's probably several other criteria in there to really enhance their target population or narrow it down so that you really know who you're talking about. And you would put the information in the section 4, your rationale in section 4 would justify why you're expanding this activity. Another way to amend your CIM plan is to extend the time of services. And this means that you're going to be serving the same group of students with the same services through the end of your 3-year CIM plan. And you'll be spending your budgets consecutively. So this suggests that you will be able to expend all of your funds in each budget period within that period, that budget period. Here's another example, or here's an example of extending. If you're serving K-3 students with your first budget, instead of ending at the end of your first budget, you would serve the same exact students through the end of year 3 with the same services, expending the initial funds first, then using the second set of funds and possibly the third set of funds. But you're going to actually be serving them in 1st through 4th grade in the second go round. And in the third go round, the third budget, you'd be serving them in grades 2 through 5. So you started in K through 3, and you're extending the time that those students receive those services by following them as they advance through the grades. This particular scenario is really quite common in the second year of identification, and that's because the first plan has had limited time for implementation and limited data is available to demonstrate effectiveness. So this is one of those that might make sense for those of you who haven't had a chance to implement. I already mentioned that piece about you've got to be able to expend all of those funds within each budget's required 27-month area. All right. Amending the CIM plan by deepening it. In this third type of continuation, we're deepening the services for the same students based on criteria that have already established in the CIM plan for the target population, and we're deepening it by adding new resources. That could be materials, that could be people, that could be curriculum, whatever's needed to further enhance the effectiveness of the services to these particular students. And the nature of this continuation really indicates that there will be some overlap of both services between the 2 plans, or not really 2 plans, the original plan and the amendment, and those 2 budgets. So you want to make sure that you take into consideration the implementation data and progress that you're seeing. And there should be some indication that the implementation of these specific resources will make a real difference. That we're not just adding programs on with a hope and a prayer that they're going to turn things around, or that that we're not adding activities, pardon me, to just add more services. We need to know that it's going to make a difference, that for this student group, adding these things on is going to be a big impact. Here's an example of an LEA that's currently using their CCEIS funds for a specialized literacy program. And now they want to add a supplemental online English learning program. So those 2 budgets would overlap if the specialized literacy program continued with the online English learning program when that is added. Okay. So I do want to provide a little bit of, I don't know if it's a caution, but just an awareness that all of these 3 continuation examples would assume that you are addressing the same area of identification and that your data has not shown change, or it's either showing improvement or it hasn't really changed yet. So if you've been implementing activities over many months and you're not seeing change in the data, you should probably take a step back to assess whether you should change course. But if you're early on in your implementation, your data hasn't changed, then these kinds of continuation activities are things to consider. The last area of plan continuation is adding. And what we mean by this is that we're adding new activities. There's going to be new funds to add another intervention, and that can be based on your data that are showing that different kinds of interventions might be warranted, or possibly that some of the activities that the educational partners wanted in the previous planning process, but you didn't have budget for it, that might be a way that you could add. So it could be because of a new indicator, and it could be due to some additional contributing factors or root causes, either that are related to that new indicator or that you were unable to address with the current budget. Also, it may be that you have a new group of students or that you want to focus in new areas with the same group of students. An example would be that your LEA has been implementing a program to address chronic absenteeism because it's correlated with the students in the identified group. However, the absenteeism program is not having the impact that you had hoped, and so on the measurable outcomes. And as a result, your LEA wants to begin implementing an academic remediation program designed for chronically absent students, so that even when they miss the content, they miss being in school, the students have a way to quickly get up to speed. Now, it may be that you add this remediation program on top of the chronic absenteeism program if you think that it's going to make a difference, that continuing that chronic absenteeism program, or you might just change it. One thing I want to mention is that if you are deleting an activity or a measurable outcome, you're not going to put it in the chart that is on, I think we're on section, let me see, section 6. However, you will want to put some information about that in your rationale for changes in section 5. So it's important that you're aware that you're not going to carry, you may not, it's possible you may not carry everything over, but if you do not carry something over, you need to be sure that you are explaining that to CDE so that they can approve or not approve. Again, this either shows that you've got new data around a new indicator, or that the data that you're looking at in the implementation is showing that something different is needed in order to do the adding of the continuation. Now, I want to say that there may be several ways in which you continue your base plan or your CIM plan. What I mean by that is you might choose to expand one activity while you're extending the time of another activity based on your data, based on what you have discovered. So you should not assume that you're just going to extend your CIM plan with, which means that you're keeping all of the measurable outcomes and activities with the 2025 budget. That may be the case, but it might not be. And so this is a conversation you'd have with your CIM team and your educational partners so that you can be looking at your implementation data and making really good choices about that. So I'm going to stop for a quick second and see if there are any questions about that. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to quick look. Okay. Great. It looks like we are ready for our breakout rooms. So now it is your turn. We have breakout rooms for 3 minutes, for 10 minutes. And you will be assigned either to your own FMTA consultant or to another one. I know that Lorraine is not here today. So if you are working with Lorraine, you'll be assigned to a different room. And after the time that you're spending with your FMTA consultant talking about how you might continue your work, we'll come back with a little bit more information to share with you before the end of our time. Okay, so we have a few more things to talk about, and we're going to be moving into talking about the CCEIS budget timelines. And what I want to do is I want to kind of give you this visual before we talk about the budget. So with your initial plan, you had that 27-month budget, right? And then with your first amendment, you have another 27 months budget that overlaps the first one. And with your second amendment, you have a third budget, which overlaps with both of them for just a few months. But the reason this is important is we want for you to attend, as I mentioned earlier, about how you're spending each of the budgets. So it's important for accuracy in bookkeeping, but also to make sure that you're expending all of your funds within that 27-month time period for each of the budgets. So as a reminder, the budgets start July 1st, but you must wait for CDE approval of your amendment before you start spending those funds of the 2025 funds, right? So in section 7, you have the opportunity to adjust your 2024 budget if it's needed. And based on what you decide to do with your continuation, you may or may not need to adjust your 2024 budget, but this is the place that you would do it in section 7. And then in section 8, you're actually going to create your 2025 budget. It's an entirely new budget, even if you're keeping the same activities. So you'll need to estimate your budget as determined by your current IDEA allocation and build your budget around that estimate. If you're extending your plan, you must expend the 2024 budget within that 27-month time period, and then you must expend your 2025 budget within that 27-month period related to that particular budget. So I think we've emphasized that enough. So we want you to take time to think through your budgets. What are the implications of how you are continuing or amending your CIM plan in relation to your budgets? And also be sure to double check your math for accuracy. So this is a wonderful time to draw upon your fiscal colleagues. They can help ensure that your budgets meet all of the requirements and that all of your funds will be expended in a timely manner. Now, it's easy in this time where funds are limited. There may be cuts in your district. There may be maybe just a tight budget. It's tempting to move your CCEIS funds into something that is going to be lost with some budget cuts, but you can't do that because you want to be careful not to supplant. And so we'll help you with thinking about what those allowable expenditures are. There's a number of state and federal rules and regulations that limit or define how you can use your CCEIS funds. And in the participant folder, there are 2 resources to support you in making decisions about funding your activities with CCEIS funds. The first is this allowable expenditures document, and the second is the essential questions and answers from the Office of Special Education Programs. That second document has a section on how you can use funds, the CCEIS funds, what's allowable and what's not. It's not the entire answer, but it gives you some guidance on that. And we've shared these resources with you in the past, so we're not going to spend a lot of time going over them today. But if you do have questions, please feel free to reach out and let us know. And lastly, I want to remind you that, as I just mentioned, you must be careful that the funds you use supplement your current educational activities, but do not supplant them. After you've completed your budgets, both your 2024 and your 2025 budgets, in section 9, you have to obtain 2 signatures, and this is from your LEA fiscal agent and your SELPA fiscal agent. They are validating the accuracy of information in sections 7 and 8, so in the budgets. So it's very important that they are involved and they are understanding what the budgets are intended to be used for. It's important that you either have a wet or real signature or a valid electronic signature for these two signatures. And then the last section, believe it or not, the last section is the signatures for the entire amendment. So you're looking at getting the LEA superintendent, the special education director, your school board chairperson, and your SALPA director. They are stating that they validate the accuracy of the amendment and they agree to implement the amendment. So you want to be sure that you're planning to complete your amendment in plenty of time, that you can be sure that you can get it before each of these administrators and in front of the board in a timely manner. So remembering that October 10th deadline is pretty important. And Connie has a couple of reminders to share with you.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, so we're getting to the end here. We're just you've gone through the sections that have to be filled out. And just to, again, as Susan said, a couple of reminders based on what we commonly see. And I think from the breakouts, I've lost my ability to change the slides, Susan, so I'm going to ask you to do that for me. Okay, so one thing is, again, just making sure, even if things are continuing, that you're checking and changing the dates on your timelines. It's not unusual for us to see somebody just copy and paste everything over, but then they didn't actually change when are things happening, and you do want them to be current. So a quick fix. And then double check again which budget you're using for each activity. So especially if you're continuing, sometimes you're continuing an activity, but you're still using the former budget because the money is not all spent and you do have 27 months to spend it. So you might not be doing that right away. But sometimes you are switching budgets for one reason or another. So you just want to double check those numbers again and make sure to include your fiscal staff so that it actually, what you're sharing ends up being accurate with what you end up reporting in your progress reports. Okay, and then as we said previously, your target population, making sure that's appropriate. That's partly, again, so that you keep your focus on who it is that you're making changes for. If you're doing anything that's systemic, it still is a certain group of students that you're really trying to support with these changes. So you want to keep track of that. And then, as I said, you'll be giving numbers to CDE. So you don't want to later on be trying to like, did we count this student? Is this one part of it or not, right? Like really know as you get started, who are your students? And then, as we said previously, if you have a new indicator that you've actually examined the data tied to that indicator to inform your measurable outcomes and activities. And I know Susan has said this a few times throughout, but whether or not you have a new indicator or not, you really do want to keep that educational partners group involved in this process so that as you're making decisions about what happens next, whether or not to change something, continue something, that you have that voice of your community and all of the people that you're trying to impact as part of that. And then, of course, making sure you have time to get all of the signatures that you need in order to submit it by the deadline. So typically the person that might be the most challenging is your board chair, depending on if your LEA requires you to actually present it in a board meeting, then you want to be on that calendar and make sure you have time for that so you still make the deadline. And there it is again, your educational partners. They're so important. So we really want to make sure that you're including them in this process. And as you are looking at your measurable outcomes and again, what successes or not you've had, if you don't start with some kind of baseline measurement, again, it's never too late to do that. Ideally, you would have done that when you started your plan. But if you haven't, again, you can use that group to help you determine which areas do we not really have a strong baseline so that we can tell whether or not things are working as we move forward, right? So use that group, it would be a big help. So I just quickly want to say that, for our amendment folks, we really sort of limit how much of your time we take, but we do really want to be here to support you. So we have some upcoming meetings that are completely optional. Some of them may be really relevant to you depending on your LEA and what it looks like. So you can see we have listed our community of practice meetings, some of them topic specific. There's one for high school districts. There's one for anyone working on implementation, which include all of you. LEAs with small students student population. So those of you that feel like, I'm really tiny and I'm not like, some of these other large districts with big budgets and so on. So again, you have particular barriers or challenges and even particular successes that can happen, things that can happen easier because you're smaller. So anyway, nice to get together with a group that's similar to you to have conversations. The last one that's topic specific is for those that are out with our Hispanic population in SLD. Again, as you saw from that early slide, we have a lot in that area. So we wanted to provide some supports specifically for folks in that category. And then we have just office hours. So those are just times where you can just pop in and listen, ask a question if you want. You can come in and out, or you could just come and listen because you want to hear what other people are asking. One is going to be with a bit of focus on policies, practice, and procedures, and another one on the case study process. So again, just some of the things that are coming up that you have access to. You'll get invitations for those. I'm going to pass it back to Susan to show you where to find that and other stuff on our website.
Okay, so you will notice that this website looks a little bit different. And I just want to give you an idea of where you're going to find the information that Connie just mentioned. So you're going to go to SPP-TAP.org, and then you're going to find the calendar tab. This is a brand new tab. And what that tab has for you is the information about the activities that are related to your work. And so what you want to be sure when you get into the calendar is you want to click on this CIM Plan amendment tag. It looks like a folder in front of it. If you click on that, all of the things that are related to your work around the amendment, including all of those support opportunities that Connie just mentioned, will pop up for you. So that'll be something to keep in mind. And I don't see that there's any questions. Was there something that I might have missed? Doesn't look like it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share with you our contact information in a moment. Oh, wait, it looks like there is a question. Nope, just a thank you. Thank you, Carol. The survey that's on the screen is for giving us some feedback about the information that we provided today and the resources. So we really appreciate your honest feedback so we know whether we hit the mark or not. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you can contact us at SPP-TAP at napacoe.org, or you can contact CDE at SIGDISP, SIGDISP at cde.ca.gov. And of course, you could always contact your FMTA consultant. So thank you all for your time today, and let us know if there's anything else we can help you with.
So we'll leave the room open while folks are filling out that quick poll evaluation. And of course, if you have a last minute question, you want to, unmute yourself or put it in chat. We're still sitting here in the room. I do want to thank all of the CDE FMTA consultants that were with us today. Appreciate you being here so you could have the time with your LEAs. And of course, our TA facilitators, we love having you here as well. And we made it through the afternoon. Afternoons are not easy. Thank you guys for sticking around. Appreciate it.
All right, looks like everyone submitted their surveys. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll.
I think we can go ahead and close the meeting since we have closed the poll and I don't see any questions in chat. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you, everybody.